I'm Simon Taylor, the CEO and founder of HYCU. HYCU stands for Hybrid Cloud Uptime. And the reason why we named the company HYCU was because we wanted to design a modern data protection business that was essentially going to take all the data in a language and boil it down into one small, elegant package, much like a Japanese haiku poem. So, today I'll be walking you through who HYCU is, and then we're going to get into the major problems that we see in the industry and how HYCU is attempting to solve those. So to start off, I'll tell you a little bit about us. HYCU today is the world's fastest growing backup as a service or data protection as a service business. We've got over 3,600 customers in actually 78 countries around the world, and we've raised $140 million in the last 12 months. Our major investors are Bain Capital, Acrew, Cisco, and Atlassian, as well as Okta. And I think as we get into the presentation and we start to talk about what it is that we do and why we do it, you'll see that some of those strategic investors play a key role in who we are and why we're so successful. All right, again, with 3,600 plus, it's now 3,800 organizations around the world leveraging HYCU. The very first question we always get is, well, who are they? So when we think about our business, we have about 60% of it in the United States, 40% in international, and we've got a really terrific presence in Fed and SLED. I think one of the surprising things about our business is that unlike many other startups and many other companies that get into this arena, it usually takes them many, many years to get into the federal space. At this point, HYCU has over 100 different agencies in the United States government alone that we are working with, including a number of agencies that we won't mention here. When we talk about our team, I brag, and I could brag all day. Don always coaches me on holding myself back a little bit because I really do believe this is the most world-class data protection team in the world. First and foremost, our incredible board members, not just myself, but also Enrique Salem, the former CEO of Symantec and general partner at Bain Capital Ventures, as well as Teresa Gao, who some of you may know as one of the first investors into Facebook and one of the most successful female investors in the United States, but forget about gender, simply one of the most successful people I've ever met in my life. Finally, our executive team. Now, when you're building a company like HYCU, you need domain expertise, you need market expertise, you also need startup and grit. And I think we've really assembled a world-class team here to make us successful. Goran Grevsky and I, this is our second company that we built together. And in fact, our first, time meeting all of you at Cloud Field Days was back in 2016, I believe, with a very different set of products that we won't talk about here today. Goran's been in the business for about 35, I won't even say how many years now. I think he started off by building HP Data Protector, Avamar, Legato, and a number of others. Sabaya Sundaram, who comes to us from EMC, as well as a number of startups. Coley Burke, our new Chief Revenue Officer. Some of you may know him. He was the CRO at both Zerto and at Sempris. So very deep in the street with the data protection marketplace. Kelly Hopping, our world-class Chief Marketing Officer. Kelly's her experience comes from both Gartner, as well as a Rackspace and a wide variety of others. Tanya Parrish, our Chief People Officer, who comes out of Comtrade Group. And Justin Schumacher, our new CFO, who comes out of JumpCloud. So again, a world-class team, a world-class board, and a group of folks who are really designed to help us rocket ship HYCU, for the next few years. So, I like to talk about key metrics when I explain who we are. I think it gives a sense of viability. I think it helps you to understand who we are and how we measure our own business. So again, 78 plus countries, 400 plus total partners, 3,800 total customers, and the most important thing that you'll see today from me, the fact that we have a 91 NPS score. I know it has become commonplace in the industry today for people to brag about their NPS score, and you have to wonder why so many companies all have the same score, and I'm sure you're wondering the same thing here. We take NPS very, very seriously at this company. Customer success is, without a doubt, the most important client-facing aspect of HYCU. And we take it so seriously that we have made a mandate that we will never charge for professional services. Why? Because I truly fundamentally believe that the moment you start making money off of other people's pain is the moment that you stop solving customer problems. And so when you look up HYCU, when you look through the feedback on HYCU, what you will always see is that we have the world's best data protection support and customer success teams. And that is because we are so fanatical about customer success. We bake into all of our roadmap items the items that come out of our NPS score assessments. And yes, we NPS score assess every single HYCU customer, every single one. All right. I'm going to go a little bit faster here because I want to get to the good stuff and stop telling you about who we are. Again, our backstory, we started with Nutanix backup and recovery. We added VMware, Google 365, Azure, Kubernetes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We started out this business with two very simple paradigms that we wanted to solve for. The first was the idea that the data protection market was old and it was stale. We wanted to modernize. We wanted to consumerize. We wanted the data protection experience to be better than it had ever been before for customers. That was easy. You make it SaaS. You make it policy-based. But what about the second problem we set out to solve, which was equivalency? When we looked at the history of data protection, and I'll try not to name our competitors here, but there was a company that was designed to back up and recover Unix. There was another competitor that was designed to back up and recover Windows servers, somebody else to do VMware. What we simply said to ourselves was, we're now living in a truly multi-cloud world. Nobody's going to have a homogeneous environment, and if they do, they won't have one for very long. So the problem that we see is what we call the equivalency challenge. How do you create an equivalent level of data protection support on-prem, in public cloud, and in SaaS? And I think ultimately, this is where we started moving beyond plugins, and we started to move towards a more platform approach. So in 2018, we actually took all of these purpose-built backup and recovery services, and we knitted them together under a single pane of glass that we called HYCU Protege. We added disaster recovery as a service, we added data migration, and all of a sudden, we had one console that could rule them all. We had one single pane of glass in which all of these independent backup and recovery services could be actively supported and actively managed. We thought this was terrific. We said, we've done something that nobody's done before. We've brought together on-prem and public cloud. Isn't that phenomenal? Isn't that fantastic? Pat ourselves on the back, go to sleep. Well, wait a second. There was a problem with the equivalency challenge. And that problem was that data silos began to explode. When Goran and I first sat down, and then with Savaya Sundaram, our chief product officer, and we started to discuss the equivalency problem, we said, well, customers have, a little bit of Azure, a little bit of AWS, maybe some Google Cloud, they've got some VMware, some physical servers, et cetera. But what started to happen is we started to see customers go from 4 to 5 to 20 to 50 different data silos to 100 until we finally called up Okta, which is how we began our Okta relationship. And we said, you guys do single sign-on. When you look at a company, how many different places does their data actually sit in? And what the Okta folks told us was that, in fact, the average mid-market company today has their data in no less than 217 different SaaS services. This blew our mind. We suddenly sat back and we said, well, wait a second. How do we account for this? Are companies really going to have 217 different backup products? And wait a second. They don't all have the same different data silos, do they? In fact, today, there are over 17,000 different SaaS services in the United States alone. 17,000 services, making up 70% of total company software use. And that's any combination of those 17,000 across 217 services per company. These numbers started to blow our mind. Then we said, well, what about multi-cloud? Is multi-cloud a reality? I mean, it almost seems like a joke to ask that question today, but remember 4 years ago, people were actually arguing, will people use more than one cloud? Today, 95% of companies surveyed all said, of course we do. Of course we're not going to just use one cloud. We hate vendor lock-in. We're going to use different clouds based on the viability of that cloud for different workloads. Oh my goodness. We said, all right, so let's just rein this back in. Let's think about this again. So let's go back in time now to 2005. I always like to say my father was the CIO at Putnam Investments, God rest his soul. But my joke is that my father, well, his job wasn't that hard. Because in 2005, what did his data estate look like? He probably had his data in 5 or 6 different places. Maybe some physical Linux, maybe some physical Windows, a bunch of servers, some storage, etc. Well, what happened in 2020? If we represent the entire modern data estate with this 100-sided die, imagine trying to protect in 2020 versus trying to protect your data estate in 2005. How much more surface area you have to cover, how many different kinds of protection you have to bring in. This is getting way too complicated. And then we said, well, what's going to happen in the future? It's total chaos. Right, so I did this slide a few times and a few people nodded and so on and so forth. And then Andy Fernandez, our terrific product manager, he called me up and he said, listen, Simon, we've got to prove this to people. How do we prove to people that those dice are real? Well, let's look at this. Do we all agree that 20 years ago, this is effectively what our data estate looked like? Right? This is what it looked like. It wasn't any more complicated than that. All of a sudden, what happens next? Well, the rise of cloud. We start to see a little bit of SaaS, right? But essentially, this was still controllable. The folks learning this were the folks that knew this. And we still had a relatively sanguine data protection, environment. We could still use we could still cover most of our data estate with the same tools. What happened 5 years ago? All of a sudden, those clouds, those pesky multi-hypervisors said, you know what? We want more of this action. We don't just want to take their data. We want to actually add more value. So suddenly the rise of PaaS and DBaaS. Now it's starting to get more complicated. Could the same data protection tools that were backing you up 20 years ago still work here? No. Could the same data protection tools that were backing you up here and recovery here? No. But it wasn't that bad because still a bulk of your data was still sitting on-prem and in public cloud. And there were a few tools for that. But let's look at today. Does anyone disagree that this is what the world looks like today? All of a sudden, we've got so much SaaS. So much SaaS. And this is a problem. This is a real problem. So how do you think about, as a modern data protection company, evolving what you do from something that supports this, when we started thinking about HYCU, to here? How do you solve for this challenge? Because if we don't solve for this challenge, we end up with 212 different backup vendors, and nobody wants to see 212 backup vendors. You guys would have a lot of cloud field days. Now, the biggest problem with this is what we call the biggest myth of our time, which is everybody believes something that is fundamentally false. Everybody believes that all of this is protected by somebody else. They don't know who. Maybe it's a magic elf. We're not sure. But we all believe, or so much of the marketplace believes, that somebody else has got their back. And in fact, if you call these SaaS vendors and you say, is your data backed up? They say yes. But you asked the wrong question. It's not their data you care about. It's yours. And in 95% of the cases, the answer is going to be no. SaaS providers do not back up and recover customer data. They do not provide granular recovery. We said, my goodness, all right, so this is the challenge of our time. 77% of business critical data is now not protected. And this creates a massive, massive erosion of trust and a problem in the marketplace. Because if you think about offense, defense, our offensive capabilities are getting cheaper by the second. In fact, if you're a cyber criminal, you can go on the dark web and get white glove service, custom terrorist equipment to go and hack and execute ransomware attacks. But for a customer, the defense piece is getting so much more expensive because it's such a more complex environment, it's harder to deal with. And this leads to one of the biggest problems in the world, which is that more than half of the world's companies have experienced a ransomware attack on SaaS applications with an astonishing 52% success rate. More than half of the world's companies have been attacked through SaaS, and a majority of them are successful attacks. This is so frightening to us. And we said, we fundamentally have to solve this problem. The old legacy players aren't going to do it and can't do it. We've got truly extensible architecture. We are a modern data protection company. We're trying to simplify this entire industry. We've got to do something about this. So we started to look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant and a whole slew of other different analyst reports, and we said, there's got to be folks that are backing up and recovering data and SaaS. So we added them all up. Out of 17,000 SaaS services, only 5 were protected. Not 5%. 5 services are actually protected by an enterprise data protection company. We said, okay, this is the challenge of our time. This is what we fundamentally have to solve. You know, I'm going to go a little bit quicker here, but essentially people then said to me, well, Simon, why hasn't anyone fixed this problem? Well, you know how we build data protection, one source at a time. Of course, nobody's fixed this problem. Of course, nobody's figured out how they can write 17,000 different backup products. I mean, that would take an infinite amount of time, money, and resources. It's not going to happen. You know, and then the second question is, what about the SaaS vendors? Do they care? Look, it's not that they don't care. The SaaS vendors we speak to all the time, they say, we do care about this problem. But if I go to my board and say, hey, we're going to become a data protection company, the board's going to say, hey guys, could you please focus on your core business? Well, this becomes the chicken and egg, because you know what happens? If those same SaaS vendors call up an enterprise data protection company, just think of one in your mind right now that's not HYCU, right? Picture a 100 million ARR SaaS company. They call up a major enterprise data protection vendor and say, will you please build an integration into our service? What's the answer they're going to get? No.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, no.
The TAM's not big enough. We don't care. And so this becomes the chicken and the egg. Even if they want data protection from one of these enterprise data protection vendors, they can't get it. And yet the customer cannot recover their data. There is no company that has solved both end customer and SaaS vendor pain until now. I want to introduce to you our cloud, the world's first development platform for data protection. The way that HYCU has solved this problem is we realized that yes, it would take an infinite amount of time, money, and resources to make this work. But what if we turn the industry on its head? What we realized is it shouldn't be HYCU building integrations for 17,000 SaaS companies. It should be 17,000 SaaS companies having the capability to write to HYCU. And that's what our cloud's all about. Now, we call this our penicillin moment. Why? Because we're eating a bologna sandwich, we fall asleep, we wake up, and we've cured disease. Right? So the idea here is that, you know, our penicillin moment is very simply this. It's the idea that we had built these purpose-built integrations, right? Remember HYCU's purpose-built data protection as a service. We had uplifted all that data under a single pane of glass. But our engineers, they're a cheeky bunch, and they were sitting there in Slovenia and they said, man, this guy Simon, every day he's got some new crazy idea. You know, they're always making us build some other integration. We're going to just rewrite this code so that it's truly extensible because I don't want to have to keep writing these integrations all the time. Wait a sec. So you're telling me we have a truly extensible platform? Yes. So if we had unlimited time, money, and resources, we could build 17,000 integrations and it would all work inside HYCU Protégé. Yes. Okay. We just need to get those 17,000 SaaS services to write to us. And so what we did is we said, the first thing we need to do is create a low-code development platform for data protection. What these folks don't want, and I mean SaaS services, partners, customers, they know they've got this problem. But when they come, they can't sit there and learn how to be a data protection vendor. We said, look, we're all policy-based, we're all API-driven. What if we use a low-code paradigm that we create ourselves? Have them answer questions, and then have that evolve into an application in our marketplace. Let's make this very, very easy. So for the customer, when you think about this, their data is now in on-prem, it's in cloud and modern apps, SaaS, database as a service, platform as a service. You've got your data spread all over the place. What you need to do is first gain true visibility of this platform. So the SaaS vendor can now build an integration using our cloud. And for the customer, we said, we want to make your entire data estate visible to you because you don't know what you have. It's amazing. We've sat with CIOs very powerful, well-known CIOs. And those CIOs have said to us, I don't think we use that much SaaS. And then somebody writes down on a napkin, what about this, sir? What about this, sir? What about this? What about this one? And suddenly they go, oof, I'm not even sure what we're using. So much shadow IT, so many purchases made by departments. Well, what we decided to do is we said, look, let's make a almost like beautiful tree that will provide an easy and simple visualization of the entire data estate. And we said, but we don't want to sit there and have to figure out how to auto-discover this. This has got to be a completely automated process. Called up our friends at Okta. Patented a simple integration with Okta that allows us to read single sign-on, take all that data, and visualize it. We then analyze the data gravity, the value of that data, and then we tell you whether or not that data is protected or not. And we call that our graph. So the first step of this process for the end customer that we solve with our cloud is visualization, the ability to see where all of your data is.
So is it just things that it can get through single sign-on? Or are you going to show us another way?
Great question. Yes, there's a manual process override as well, in which you can simply enter into it anything else that's in your environment. So you get a complete tree, on-prem, public cloud, and SaaS.
And is this just inventorying services or the data within it, like profiling the data or understanding the data?
So it does not do business intelligence at this point. What it's really looking to do is tell you, is the underlying workload protected or not protected?
Okay.
So is there a backup service and is it in compliance with your policies as you've stated?
Okay.
So you can actually set your RPO, your RTO, your recovery time objective, all these things, your retention, your data retention period. And essentially what it's going to do is say, do you have the data protection turned on? Is it in compliance with company policies? Is there something else you need to fix? Okay. Now, the second piece of this is we said, okay, so after you visualize, you need to be able to create a resilient environment. And so we said, look, once you can see all the data in our graph, we want you to be able to pull up any integration for any service inside the R marketplace, the R cloud marketplace. So when a developer uses the low-code development platform to build an integration to HYCU, they can very easily then put that into our marketplace, and it becomes easily accessible for our customers. And then finally, we said, after you visualize your data, because it's really complex, after you make your data resilient with these integrations, you need a way to check yourself. You need to be able to audit your environment and tell yourself if you're actually in compliance. And so we took our R-score, which is the world's first scoring technology, which allows you to assess and quantify your ability to recover from a ransomware attack. It's a resiliency measure. And we applied this to our cloud so that now you not only see the data, back it up and make it recoverable, you can now quantify your ability to recover in the event of an emergency. And we called all of that our cloud. We believe that this is an absolute game changer in the world of modern data protection. We're going to go into the specifics of the architecture. We're going to walk you through specific use cases to show you our cloud in action. But ultimately, this is how we solve the explosion of data silos in the modern data estate and ensure that we fight back against the scourge of ransomware.
For the policy enforcement piece, are there set policies and pre-configured, or do you have the ability to go in and create your own?
You can do both. So we do gold, silver, bronze. I mean, you literally have set policies that you can just choose, but you can go in and create your own custom as well.
What's involved in getting into the marketplace as a SaaS vendor?
So it's basically 3 easy steps. The first is you sign up. The second is you access our low-code platform. You fill out the service. The third most important step is there is a 1 week. It takes only 24 hours to actually build the integration, but there is a 2-week certification process. We are very careful with ensuring that this is the same quality of data protection that any HYCU service has ever provided. And so we run this through every check and balance that we would use for our own internal. And it's all written, again, because the parameters of the low-code platform are very well defined. It's very difficult to actually, add anything that would create security risks.
And is glad you mentioned security. So is one of those parameters making sure that you're dealing with the actual company that we're talking about, not some,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So we absolutely do a fundamental check there to make sure. And then we publish in the marketplace the actual author to certify who that author is. And we have documents. There's a whole documentation process on the back end to ensure that that's contracted with the company.